Negotiation for compensation. Operations section of CFO 100. In this lecture, you can learn how to negotiate compensation in the construction period of the project and even in the operation period of the businesses. Some incidents cause damage to your business and wrongly provided service causes the same consequence. Your company must claim compensation to recover that damage. CFO should understand the essential points to proceed with the compensation negotiation and monitor the direction. Before learning techniques, you remember that the core concept for a compensation deal is that you need to get fair and reasonable compensation based on the business contract. You require the maker and the producer to cover the loss and damage. It would help if you were not greedy to get more things than the contract, because it ultimately causes negative consequences. Below this page, you look at the critical points to consider in preparation and negotiation. The first one is legal obligation. In a business contract, there is legal obligation as for what case, for what amount, for what coverage that the compensation covers such damage and loss. The right of claim is described in the contract, and there may be a limit of compensation and exemption. The second is the fact check and the responsibility. In case of that, the producer of the defect parts doesn't accept the RCA, a root cause analysis. A third-party report might be necessary to determine the fact. The negotiation should be based on the fact and responsibility. And also, you need to calculate the actual loss amount and the necessary compensation amount. You need to understand the exact loss amount to ensure you get the opportunity to recover it. The next point is the internal target date and amount. As the nature of this negotiation, it takes a long time and it is not easy to get adequate amount because each party cannot easily agree with their compensation amount and condition. But if it continues for a long time, it could not be better for both parties. You need to set up the internal target and amount even though it should not appear to your counterparty. You will close a deal until that moment, considering the balance of amount and the damage. In the negotiation process, you need to utilize both official and unofficial approach to understand the real interest of the counterpart. As the nature of negotiation, people usually stay a hard stance in official meetings, but they must have room of bargaining. In the end, settlement of the documentation process is also an essential part. Even though both parties agree with the amount and the condition in the negotiation process, a party may raise an objection in the documentation process regarding a small wording. You must pay attention until the end of the process. In the next slide, you can understand several options for compensation. There are different methodologies for compensation. You may imagine compensation as cash, but the other option will appear in front of you. When you negotiate with the service providers and the makers to get compensation, they sometimes propose non-cash compensation. and you need to understand the pros and cons of each option. CFO assess the fairness and the financial impact of each settlement way, so in this slide, you can understand those options. The first one is obvious, it's the cash. For the receiver side, it is generally the most favorable option. For the payer side, it is an apparent loss for compensation as much as the exact requested amount. The money is coming at the right timing to the pocket of receiver, and the company can use that money to recover the damage or to pay compensation to its customer. Its flexibility is the highest among the options, but the payer usually hesitate to do that. The compensation amount is simply booked as an expense, and the direct cash out as total compensation happens. And also the payer cannot use the effect of a time discount. On the other hand, the payer may propose spare parts as compensation. If you are handling machines and factories, it usually needs spare parts. Instead of paying the compensation amount by cash, the producer of the machine gives the spare parts equivalent to that compensation value. As a producer side, only the original cost of the parts is cash out instead of full amount of compensation. The logic is that 5 million value parts have 8 million in market value, for example. Supplying the spare parts as 8 million compensation is relatively friendly for the payer side. In addition, there is the other way, which is near to providing spare parts. It is the option of providing other services or other goods. It is also easier than cash for payer side and has the same nature as spare parts. The providing cost is lower than the exact market value and the compensation amount. And then, lastly, there is an option to offset with costs. If there is continuous transaction and obligation between the provider and the company, the provider can set off mutual obligations. It may be a minor option, but it can reduce transaction and required cash. CFO must understand those options and continue the fair negotiation with the counterpart. When the negotiation is going to end, there is a moment when you explain to the management the consequence of the compensation deal. So CFO must assess whether compensation covers the loss, and a comparison table is helpful for such an explanation. If you can see the picture below, there is one table showing the loss amount of the company side as number 1 to number 3. The penalty for unconducted service means a penalty to the company's customers when it cannot perform its service because of damage to the machine or factory, and they lost their potential profit. It means that not only the penalty but also the company lost the opportunity to get the profit. Lastly, the facility or factory should be repaired, so you need to pay the replacement cost for it. The total loss is 13 million. By making the table, it has become clear for everyone what is the real damage of the incident and how much you should recover by compensation. This is not only for explanation for the management, but also helpful in setting the target amount as a working group. On the next slide, you can see the other table that shows the compensation side. This is the content of compensation, So from number 4 to number 6, it shows the item as details. The product maker proposes an amount covering a replacement cost. It is a minimum point to be recovered. In addition, there are other portions, such as spare parts and cash out. They will cover the 6 million compensation amount by providing the spare parts in the future and will pay some money for the compensation now. It is also 13 million, but does it cover the total loss? You need to explain clearly when the management signs the settlement agreement. In this case, the product maker is trying to mitigate their compensation as cash, though item number 1 and item number 2 are immediate cash out on the company side. So, at first look, that compensation amount covers the loss amount fairly, but the reality is not like that. So, as a CFO, accountability to the management is essential to protect and control the loss of the instant. So a precise comparison is helpful for that purpose. You may not be able to imagine the negotiation process and the reality. You can learn the sample cases in another lecture. Please note that the lecture contents are connected to the other course that explain the sudden instant. You first understand the sudden instant, then you also learn this lecture.